Hello and welcome everyone, particularly those new to Achates. Achates is a strategy, fundraising, organisational change and recruitment company dedicated to the cultural sector. This session today has been pre-recorded and is first broadcast at 1 p.m. on the 19th of September. If you're watching the broadcast live, please note that Achates colleagues are on hand to answer any questions via the comments section. Over the last 10 years, Achates has provided provocation and inspiration to organisations and senior individuals across the cultural sector, providing expert, market disruptor and inclusive thinking about strategy, recruitment, fundraising and organisational change. In today's Achates Inspires, I'm delighted to be exploring how the cultural sector is looking to develop the business planning cycle to adapt to alternative and hopefully more sustainable business models. I've invited two fantastic voices to this conversation with me today. Katie Posner, the Joint Artistic Director and CEO of Paynes Plough.
Hello.
And also Edward Kemp, the Chief Executive of the Royal Literary Foundation.
Hello.
Thanks both so much. Katie joined Paynes Plough as Joint Artistic Director with Charlotte Bennett in August 2019. For Paynes Plough, Katie has most recently directed Fringe First award-winning play Strategic Love Play by Miriam Batty and You Bury Me by Arlam, winner of the Women's Prize for Playwriting. Katie's an experienced and award-winning director. She's worked across a wide variety of productions, both overseas and on national tours, including multiple productions with York Theatre Royal and Pilot Theatre, with whom she was Associate Director from 2009 until 2017. Her work encompasses both intimate pieces of new writing and larger-scale community pieces. In 2019, Katie received a UK Theatre nomination as Best Director with her production of My Mother Said I Never Should at Theatre by the Lake. Edward Kemp is a playwright, dramaturg, translator, director and teacher. From 2007 to 2021, he was the Director and Chief Exec of the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, RADA, and was also Joint Principal of the Conservatory of Dance and Drama. He's worked for the National Theatre, Royal Shakespeare Company, Royal Opera House, Glyndebourne, the BBC, and for companies across Europe and North America. Writing and adaptations include 511, Six Pictures of Lee Miller, Racine's Andromache, King James Bible, and works by Brecht, Goldoni, Kleist, Lorca, and Molière, and screenplays for Disney Plus and RADA. Libretti include How the Whale Became, The Yellow Sofa, The Ground Beneath Her Feet. He is a trustee of Central School of Ballet and co-chair of Theatre Fudisi. He is taught at the Royal College of Art, Guildhall School of Speech and Drama, Trinity Laban, and Bennington, Vermont. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's not news to say that the last few years have been a turbulent time for the cultural sector, and the events of recent years in particular have left our business models no longer fit for purpose. From the impact of COVID to the rising costs of running buildings and the unexpected challenges of financial pressures, alongside an increased landscape of Arts Council cuts and frozen grant opportunities, have led many organisations struggling to find their way out of business as usual. As a result, all leaders in the sector are looking at ways we can innovate our business models to ensure the long-term sustainability of our organisations. While some of this work has been prompted by the necessity of the current landscape, many leaders are also approaching this as an opportunity for meaningful, purpose-led organisational development, which not only ensures the survival, but also creates an opportunity for organisations to continue to deliver the greatest impact for our priority audiences and stakeholders for generations to come. Presenting these challenges as a chance for growth and development provides us with an opportunity to learn from other sectors, imagine more radical models, and find new and more innovative ways of running our organisations. Our sector is at the forefront of innovation on our stages and in the art we make, but often we're more scared to adopt new and radical approaches behind the scenes. At Achates, we advocate that organisations think about the triple bottom line. This helps organisations to reflect the multiple bottom lines which, as a charity, we have to balance as opposed to a commercial organisation. That is, work, audiences, and the impact with and for those audiences, and money. We also advocate for organisations not simply monitoring or undertaking evaluation processes as defined by funders, but instead engaging with their audiences, stakeholders, and indeed staff teams in true consultation processes that help to explore new ways of thinking about the contexts our organisations are operating within, as well as to help creatively find alternative models for operating in the future. Today, I've invited Katie and Ed to offer us some thoughts on how organisations can go about this process of reimagining, evolving, and adapting their organisational models. So thank you both. With that context, I'd love to start by asking you both how you've navigated change in your organisation models in recent years. Katie, if I'm all right, I'd love to start with your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just writing some of those things down. I'm like, oh, these are great, juicy words. I think, I guess myself and Charlotte took over as the new ADs and CEOs of Paynes Plough in 2019, and 6 months later, we were all hit by COVID. So if ever there's a kind of baptism of fire to make active change within the context of a business and an organization and take you out of, a potential comfort zone, it was that. So I guess from that point, it was always that sense of going, certainly when you start leading an organization, you're full of all these great ideas and you've pitched, what you're going to do for the next 5 years. And very quickly that had to evolve and change. So I guess we've always started from a point of, actually, is there a better way? And where are there opportunities for change and growth? And I think it's really important, particularly in the context of the world is moving at such a pace and theatre is moving at its own pace. And how do they truly align? And when you look and sort of zoom out in the context of other businesses, and you're like, businesses are constantly evaluating and asking themselves questions, and yet theatre tends to fall into, I'd say, trends and patterns. And so I guess a lot of our starting point was going, we've got to be active and change. And so really we just had to repurpose our business model very quickly. We had to look at other ways in which we were going to commit to giving opportunities to writers. We did a whole massive new digital program. We worked with, I think, 7 regional venues to do lots of sort of repurposing of work online. And then I guess from coming out of that, we really did want to take that chance to go, okay, hold on, we can do things in a different way. And we absolutely, like, the DNA of Paynes Plough is about how we work with and for writers. And they are central to our business thinking and planning. And it's always about, how are we actively working to find opportunities and work in the context of promoting and platforming new writing, but also how we telling stories across the country, and sometimes they butt up against each other. And I think over the last few years, we've genuinely had pivot points where we've gone, okay, cool, well, we commission writers in a certain way. Well, hold on, actually, we could rethink that. And actually, we think we're meeting, as many writers is possible in the context of a small team, but actually maybe there's another intervention, maybe there's something different. So for example, one of the things we put in place was we started to look at what did it mean to submit a unsolicited script to Paynes Plough, and we thought, this is so bizarre. Like, you send an unsolicited script and you might get someone responding to you 3 months later at best and saying, no, thank you, the play's not for me. And after talking to a load of writers, we thought, well, actually, maybe a commitment is to meet people. Maybe there's another way in which people can talk about the work. So we actively committed to meeting every single person who submitted a script. We didn't quite factor in, this is bad business planning, that 898 people would go, oh, well, that sounds great. And we're a team of 7. So, that was interesting. But we did, it took us time, but we committed and we met all of those writers and we had face-to-face conversations. And then from that, it helped us to pivot into our next sort of framing of the business model, which made us go, well, hold on, we're a new writing organisation. We platform, we tour, and we produce new shows. We don't have a development arm for the organisation. Well, what does that mean? Okay, well, let's build that into being more robust. So looking at the financial spend across the organisation, and also then going, right, we're going to actively put a development arm to Paynes Plough as well as a producing and touring arm to Paynes Plough. And that's the kind of business model we're currently in. We're now at another pivot point where we're about to look at what does it mean for Paynes Plough to move out of London. So we're part of the transfer programme for ACE. It was something that we were always interested in when we took over, and asking ourselves the question, well, why does Paynes Plough need to be in London? What does that actually mean? And so now we're at another point of change and business model and looking at different diversification of income, and just seeing like, well, what does it mean? What are the opportunities that now present themselves when we take ourselves and place ourselves in the centre of the country? What does it mean to serve a region, still be a national company? So I feel like we're constantly evaluating our business models as well as our artistic program. And I think that's an amazing position to be in, because it never feels like you get bored or it doesn't feel very formulaic. And I think that can also present a lot of challenges. So I don't say that lightly, because I think it's also about making sure you're constantly taking your team on a journey. And I was really interested what you said, which is like, at Achates, how you are, you're definitely always in consultation with people to understand. And also, I think that's at pivot points for us, we do try to actively make sure that we're having conversations, whether that's with writers, with our team, with our stakeholders, and we're not just going, yeah, this would be really great. It's built on the foundations for growth. But I think we do reimagine ourselves a fair bit, or certainly try and think about the evolution of growth at Paynes Plough. But it's a journey.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I think there's some really interesting observations, if I may, that I'd like to pull out. So I think you made a really great point there about purpose being central to your business thinking and planning. So you said how we work with and for our writers, that's become central to business thinking and planning. And I think that's such a key, isn't it, to find what is unique about you as an organization and continually come back to that, not just from an artistic point of view, but from a business planning point of view as well.
Yeah.
And then I really loved that conversation you said about, you were essentially saying we're reimagining our interaction with our audiences, but by looking at their interaction with us. And one of the challenges I always love when I'm working with organizations is, why should someone bother to engage with you?
Yeah, we say that loads.
So it's great that you've identified that you want to engage with them, but why should they bother to engage with you? And so trying to then kind of imagine yourself in that position and put yourself in someone else's shoes. That's definitely why I think true consultation, particularly staff teams, are always brilliant at challenging you on things you don't want to hear, is my opinion. So it's so helpful, because it often can help you think, oh, I hadn't thought that. Actually, say your great example there of, I've submitted an unsolicited script that I've been working on for ages and I don't hear anything for 3 months, and then it's shut down. And the feeling of what that would be as a writer is a really great challenge, while also presenting you with a huge provocation in terms of resource on the other side. Thanks so much, Katie. Ed, if I may, I'm going to come to you. So just to remind you, that provocation is to thinking about how you've navigated change in your organisation model in recent years. And Ed, I'm aware that RLF is your current seat, but really interesting, as appropriate, to hear about RADA, where you sat for so long beforehand as well.
It's really, I mean, I kind of crossed sort of in the tail end of the pandemic from RADA to the RLF. And in many ways, they're sort of mirror images of each other, in that everybody has heard of RADA. You can't move without people knowing about RADA, and everybody thinks RADA is incredibly wealthy, and actually it's not. And so we endlessly had ideas about things we could do. We could be absolutely brilliant ideas. We could never afford to do it. And so it was always, how do we just kind of keep the lights on and keep the doors open and blah, blah, blah. And the pandemic, like every organization, did a body blow to that. The RLF, where I now sit, the Rotary Fund, is kind of unique in the British cultural scene, in that we have loads of money. Probably shouldn't say that quite so publicly. But for the first 200 years of our history, we kind of raised some money and gave it to some writers. And that was a sort of, like other organizations, we found people to give us money, blah, blah, blah. We gave money out. And one of various writers left us their royalties, one of whom was A.A. Milne, who left us quite a healthy chunk of Winnie the Pooh. And then Walt Disney came along, and that became an even bigger chunk. And so we now sit on a very, very large endowment, and have done for about 25 years. And in that 25 years, it's enabled the fund both to completely transform how it works. So rather than just giving grants to writers, we found lots of ways to work with writers to employ them to do work in the community. We have an education remit as well. And so on one hand, it's absolutely hugely expanded from the organization that it was 25 years ago. But actually, when I arrived, internally, it had barely changed at all. The governance was pretty much the same as it was, although we were now spending more than about 2/3 of our budget on education work, the trustees still thought we just gave out grants to writers, and that's where they think we came from. And the structures around that really didn't fit the purpose. The team was tiny. I mean, when I came in, there were about 7 of us, which for an organisation which has a turnover of about 6.5 million is pretty extraordinary. And there were lots of things. There was no finance function, really. There was no HR function. There were lots of things you just would be surprised there wasn't there. But it was working really well. And actually, what you began to realize, or I began to realize, is the extent to which too often, I think elsewhere, what the money is or isn't drives the kind of vision. You think, I'd love to do that, but I can't afford to. And suddenly there I think, well, I could afford to do lots of things. But actually, what is the vision that underpins it all? What is the thing that drives all this together? So a lot of the work I've been doing for the last 3 years since I arrived is trying to say, so what is the thing that binds together all of what we do? Because in the literary world is the most cash poor, actually. We get the least money from the Arts Council of any sector. If you're sitting on a very substantial several hundred million endowment, as we are, in that sector, you have a job to spend it wisely and assess impact. And to an extent, what had happened over the last 25 years, because we didn't need to talk to anybody apart from the writers, we talked to the writers a lot. But actually, the other people who are working with writers, we didn't really talk to because we didn't need to. So the organizations you would have to have conversations with, like funders or your partner organizations, we didn't need them because we had the money ourselves. So actually getting out there and saying, so who else is doing what? What are you doing? Where could we add value? Where could we avoid trampling what other people are doing in order to actually achieve the maximum value for the writer, who are, like with Payne's Power, the writer is absolutely central in what we do, has really been what the work has been about. And actually what I'd learned from RADA is the first thing to do is get the governance sorted out. Because if the governance isn't secure and clear and up to date and current, and ours, again, because we hadn't had to talk to anybody, had got a little bit tired. And actually, there are certain things you simply couldn't do. I felt sometimes when I first arrived, I had this amazing signal box, like one of the kind of old-fashioned signal boxes, with lots of amazing levers I could pull, but nothing was connected to anything else. So I could sit there, entertain myself, pulling levers, wouldn't do anything. So I needed to kind of do a bit of wiring, join things up. And we've kind of completed that phase. So we are now in place. Okay, so what would a strategy look like? Actually, what are the theories of change that underpin all of this work? And actually, how much of this endowment do we feel comfortable spending? There are lots of interesting conversations in the kind of investment world, the grant giving world, as to what is a reasonable amount to spend. And we're currently kind of in the middle of that pack, if you look at the outside. But there are people who say, look, we're going to spend it down. Now, we feel, having been here for 200 and something years, we have a duty for the next 200 years to keep something in the kitty. But actually, what does that mean? And certainly in terms of some of our education work, I can talk more about, we're getting to the point now where we could do a whole lot more, but we couldn't afford to. We could afford to if we went into partnership, found funders, whatever, but that changes the conversation that we've not had to have for 25 years. And so making sure everything's in place there. So that's, yeah, I've probably said enough there.
Thanks. That's so helpful, Ed. And I think it's such an interesting challenge that I think often as organizations don't realize that impact of trusts, foundations, funds, and the impact of spending out now and the impact that will generationally have as well for many of the artists that we're developing. There is such an interesting financial balance there. Endowments, obviously, I should say, and I'm sure everyone watching this knows, really common in the US, but very rare as a UK system. And it's even common in the US in a structure organizationally, so something we don't see. I definitely think the interesting challenge that you present there is if the governance isn't secure and up to date, there's simply things you can't do. And I think you also said, which I think is such an astute point, money often drives the vision from a trustee point of view. And we talk about that triple bottom line. So we talk about money, art, and audiences. And that should be the kind of the 3 things we're always in balance with and trying to balance. I think that can be really hugely difficult for trustees when there is a financial risk that they're often being asked to mitigate. And there is often a financial disconnect, I would say, to a wider staff team in understanding the financial pressures perhaps that are being decided on. And I think there's definitely, we're always going to try and be mindful of protecting people in our staff teams, particularly perhaps junior staff, where decisions, especially, I mean, I remember during COVID, every single day speaking to my chair of trustees when I was in my CE role about if I was going to make someone redundant that day. So obviously that's an inappropriate conversation to have with your wider staff team, but working out how you have those conversations so staff understand the richness of financial situations and the difficult decisions that you and trustees are making, while also trustees are able to understand the passion and the enthusiasm, the art and the impact. And we all know that that's why the majority of our trustees got involved in the first place, is they love, care, have a wide view of art just as we do. So I think it's really interesting thinking about how we then bring trustees on board with that triple bottom line. I'm interested in that, if I could just unpick slightly further. So I'm interested in how you do balance that financial pressure as a leader. So Katie, I think, yours is a far more probably normal organizational experience of just working out, for example, as you decided from transfer, what that would have looked like for you as an organization, that financial pressure. Ed, that same financial pressure, as we know, exists very much, even though you have an endowment. It just sits in a different way of current revenue spend and where you should or shouldn't spend. So I'm really interested in how you balance financial pressure while still trying to think about audiences and the art. Katie, could I come to you first?
Yeah, I was just writing notes on the governance stuff because I think it's fascinating. I think it is so interesting just looking at that top down and in alignment with financial pressure. Well, within the context of Paynes Power, we are an arts supported organisation, and we have a fairly healthy turnover. But within that context, we have a huge fundraising target every year, and every year it's getting harder and harder. And so particularly in the context of trusts and foundations, and no matter what you do in terms of repivoting and thinking about what great ideas, we're always told great ideas bring financial support. And I still am a massive advocate for that, but it is challenging. So I think we are, I guess, when we look at how we work with our board, there's a real rigor in terms of financial risk. We are a smaller organisation. At the moment, in terms of touring, venue fees are just like insane. And when you're having conversations with massive buildings that go, well, we actually can't pay a venue fee, and you're like, wow, we're tiny in terms of what we have financially, and we're having to subsidize these buildings. Like, what is that? That's madness. So what it makes us do is go, okay, well, that's not sustainable. We can't keep seeing that at cost to our financial risk. What are we going to do about it? So we have to rethink, how does Paynes Power tour? Is that much more around co-producing venues and investment in a different way? And where there's autonomy and agency of the work, there seems to be more opportunity for venue fees, etc. So I think it's sort of relying on us looking at how the business model can work within our restrictions. And then I guess also in terms of financials, we're always thinking about different potential income, funding income streams, definitely now, instead of going, oh, we've got an 80k budget line for trusts and foundations. We're like, okay, well, that's most likely not going to happen. So actually we now need to think about igniting a larger pool of individual donations. We need to rethink about potential commercial opportunities. We've just come back from the Edinburgh Fringe. That's a commercial venture for Paynes Power that allows us to get box office. Mostly it washes its face, in honesty, and that's fine, because it allows us to amplify and platform amazing new plays that tend to do very well. This year we actually were able to achieve a higher box office, and you're like, oh wow, that's great. Not extortionate, but it allows us to just lean into another sort of financial opportunity for the organization. But I think it's just constantly sort of rebalancing and repurposing, and budgets are always evolving. You know, you start from a certain place, and I think what we're now doing is going, Ed smiling, because I'm like, yes, you know this better than I do. But I think we're now going, it is no point us putting this budget line in to expect this, because it's just not achievable. So we can keep working to this same pattern, but it doesn't make sense anymore. So we actually have to be really bold, and we have to be really on it. I'm really interested what you said, which is about how do you take your team on a journey, and also what does that mean in the context of people's job roles within an organization? Because it does feel counterintuitive to sit in a team meeting and go, hey guys, we've got no money, what are we going to do? And expect those junior members of staff to go, oh God. But actually, we do work to transparency, and we do have a real rigor to our production budgets, and we have amazing producers who are aware that there isn't just, you know, an endless pool, and actually it is really challenging, and we aren't seeing trust and foundations coming in. And so there's something about creatively and dynamically working to within those restrictions. And I also say that in the context of directing work, like whenever I go and do a freelance job, I'm like, I get that you might not want to give me this, but please let me see your budget, because I will work in your parameters. Like I'm really experienced, I can do that, and I can be really creative in the context of parameters. I don't want to go on a journey where I'm working with the designer and then we come up with something fabulous that we can't afford. Like I much prefer transparency, but they all come with their own sort of personal challenges. But I think it's about taking everyone on the journey of the why. Why are we doing something? What does that mean? And then what does the financials, you know, how does that help support it? Or how do we rethink it? But governance, going back to Ed's point, we've got an amazing board at Paynes Plough, and have always had a fantastic board. And we're now in our second sort of term of being at Paynes Plough. We've got an amazing new chair as well. So we feel like the rigor of our board is fantastic. And we've really understood that we can't just go, oh, great, we just received the information. Like, it's in collaboration. We're having those conversations, and we're taking them on a journey as much as they're objectively feeding into the various arms of the organisation.
Thanks, Katie. Ed, over to you.
I was struck by Katie's word transparency, because I think that has been, there are sort of weird things that happen when the problems are how do you spend the money rather than how do you raise it. And certainly I inherited an organisation which was weirdly split in terms it would be very profligate in some areas and then incredibly penny pinching in others. And actually trying to get a sense of actually what is a reasonable amount to spend when the issue is not that you're going to run out of money, particularly, is an interesting one. And I began to realize very quickly that actually what becomes absolutely necessary is doing impact and evaluation. And that actually, when you could kind of do anything, you know, so in RADA we could never do anything. So it was really what can we find the money to do with anything at all? Keep the training going. When you can sort of do anything, why don't you? And so looking at all of the things, so you know, an amazing amount of creativity had gone on in the 25 years since the money came in before I arrived, and there were all kinds of things we were doing which had a sort of internal historical logic, but why we're doing them all in 2024 was not there. And actually we didn't know. So, you know, we can give a grant to a writer, and we know what that involves, and the writer applies, and there's a process for that, and the overheads on that are really low. And so if we want to get money to writers' pockets, just give them a grant. That's really straightforward. And it doesn't, you know, the really lean operation. We have a whole load of writers who are called fellows who start in universities and then go elsewhere. The fellowship program, writers apply, there's a recruitment process, they have to be inducted, they have to attach to a university. They get a very nice stipend for that, but the overheads on that stipend are significant. So in business terms, it's much better just give them the money and say, get on and do it, rather than this whole education thing. So actually you have to understand, what is the added value? Who is getting what out of that? What is the writer getting out of that? What are the students getting out of that? And what are the mechanisms you have for measuring that, of which we had not very many. So actually really understanding, so if I have 6.5 million to spend in a year, and there is this kind of blasted wasteland out there, the literary landscape, actually, what can I most usefully do? Do I build greenhouses or do I irrigate the soil? There are kind of those sort of things. Actually, do I work with some people who really understand that bit of land over there? Or do I say, I'm going to go for this place? And getting those conversations and having mechanisms to do that and understanding what suitable evaluation tools are, because a lot of it is about the transformative effect it's having on people. And that's harder to measure than I've increased my whatever by 7.5%. Actually, what is it doing? There are endless stories of the transformative effect it's had on writers' careers and lives. And that's the interesting bit. And it's interesting bit to my trustees. So, we're inching our way towards KPIs and things, but I'm really worried about what those are because I've worked in places where suddenly people start chasing the numbers. And actually, there are endless stories of people chasing the numbers, and managers get very good at chasing the numbers, but actually not achieving the thing you want to achieve. And so what is and again, it's where theories of change and, why are we doing this? What do we think it was going to do? Has it done it? Become the really fundamental questions. And then you can say, okay, so what is of all the things we're doing, do we want to spend more money on? Because we are reaching the point, even with the amount of money we have, where we're going to hit a ceiling quite soon. And the question is then, do we do less of something and do more of something else? Or do we enter into the world everybody else lives in of generating income from elsewhere? And what would that be like? And I think that's a threshold you kind of cross one way and you never get back over it again. So cross it carefully.
Thanks, Ed. I think you both struck something that I think is really interesting about that. It's often set financially. We often are asked to, or it's normal for us to set kind of 5-year visions that we then are perfectly comfortable with year on year, reevaluating and planning. But we often don't do that for the art and the audiences. So we're comfortable with that constant change in those settings, but actually picking a kind of 5-year plan or direction of where we're heading and then being comfortable to change it when scenarios change, things change, isn't something that is a normal part of definitely not my former practice as a leader. And I'm interested in how all those big decisions ultimately are much easier when we come back to purpose, in my opinion. And so the big thing that we advocate for in organizational and business planning is that every year purpose is realigned rather than having a vision or a mission and it being stuck to the organization for 50 years, never reviewed. We never contemplate if we've brought about change, if the landscape's changed, if the context has changed, if we've moved, if organizations have moved next to us. So I really believe that by coming back to purpose, that helps us to then make really clear decision making. And so I'm just interested in that balance for your organizations that you're leading around purpose, particularly thinking about that kind of, I'm interested in the motivation, I guess, of your own passions, motivations, interests versus being a leader and having to make the decisions that are the organization's purpose rather than your own interests. That's quite a challenging one, but hopefully you're up for it. So yeah, how do you balance the purpose of the organization versus your own motivations, passions, and interests, particularly both as makers of work as well? Katie.
Oh, it's juicy. I think they have to coexist. I think when you take over an organization, this is the first organization I've run at this artistic director, CEO level with Charlotte. And you sort of learn very quickly that if you're not bringing your authentic self and you're constantly trying to be a version of something, it doesn't work. And so in bringing your authentic self, you have to bring your artistic self. And of course, you have to bring your values and your ambitions in the context of that. And I think for how that sort of coexists is I go, if I pull myself out of Payne's Pal, I am like so passionate about telling stories. I am so audience driven. I always have been. I started my career as an actor. I was a teacher and I then found directing later on in my career. And I realized they all intersect, of course, but certainly directing and teaching and about empowering, but also reflecting back. And so like for me, just the excitement to be able to tell stories is such a gift. And then when you go, oh, and you then get to run an organization, which is a very small part of being able to do the making, because you're also balancing everything else. So I think I am also incredibly ambitious. I'm always thinking what's next. So whether that's personally, in terms of a personal development for my career, it's also thinking about what's next for the organization. So I guess, I don't know, I feel like they sort of coexist in lots of ways. And then when you go, I think where it can butt up against each other, and I think that's when you have to make a decision, okay, is the organization still right for me? Is if you're constantly pushing a personal button that is about your own internal drive. So, oh, I want to make massive shows at the National, or I want to do, this, or I want to do Shakespeare, and well, that's not Payne's Plough. So, okay, well, if I really want to do that, then that's important for me, and that's important for me, then that's what I need to do. Or I just want to be making loads of plays, and that's the most important thing to me. So, as in, I'm not saying that is, but you have to make that decision. And I think you have to come back to, okay, well, how does something serve the business and the environment you're working with? And that's really important, because you have to honor the fact that for this period of time, you're a leader, you're a gatekeeper, which I hate using that word, but it is true. And so if you're not putting the business and the best interests of the business at the sort of forefront, it doesn't work. But I do think they can, ambition and growth and opportunity can coexist until at a point it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think it's okay, isn't it, for also to go, I've given everything to this organization and it was great, but it's my time to walk away. Definitely when I left the King's Head, it was very much it's great. The purpose of the organization I now think is to be a predominantly queer organization. That's not my identification. I think this would be better run by someone else now, but for 5 years it was amazing and I loved it, but I don't think the purpose aligns with my current passion, interest, or background. So I think there's also a good thing we can say as leaders in going, it's also okay for things to end. That's a positive thing. And for leaders to change and there to be turnover in our institutions is a really good thing. And that change in turn will hopefully bring about really interesting new voices in different places, rather than us keeping the same gatekeepers at organizations as well.
Definitely. And I think we always also think about legacy. Like we're like, okay, so what does it mean when we move on from Payne's Plough and someone else will come in and they'll do it better? I hope, because I think actually all artistic directors should want the next person to come in and do a better job or a different job. I think we do think about that a lot. And what are we putting in place for that next generation? And certainly at Payne's Plough, we really sort of place ourselves as a bit of a stepping stone of firsts. So it's really exciting seeing that, the people that have worked for us that are now kind of in those next big producing building jobs or whatever they've gone on to do. And I think we really see that in the context of leadership as well. So I think that feels quite important.
Thanks. I really love that phrase as well. If you're not bringing your authentic self, it never works. Yeah, I think that is it's a really important challenge to us, particularly as well when we come back to thinking about governance as well.
Yeah.
And thinking about that relationship we have with our trustees, we have to be authentic in that space as well. Ed, hopefully that is a useful point for me to pass over to you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because at RADA, I was absolutely doing what Kate is doing. And yeah, I was in there, and to an extent, if I wasn't in the studio working with the students, I didn't feel like I was doing the job properly. I needed that. And actually, I had to kind of learn to do all the other stuff as well. And partly when I left, I wanted to get back to being a writer. That was the thing I was intending to do. But also realized I had this sort of experience and knowledge now of how you married being a creative artist, but also understanding how governance and audit committees and all that stuff worked, and wanted to do something with that. But actually, I wasn't necessarily looking for something that I'm going to pick the word authentic self and kind of come back to it. I'm going to say didn't require all of my authentic creative self to be in the center of it, because I wanted to put that elsewhere. And so to an extent, in terms of the question with the RLF, I am a writer. Writers are hugely important because I am one. And there's a kind of low hum all the time of I'm measuring against. So I am a writer. How would I feel about this? How would I feel my work to be looked at in these terms? If this opportunity was offered to me as a writer, what would I feel about it? What would I feel about this as a sector? That's sort of going on as second nature the whole time. But actually, I'm not being called upon to put that in the center. None of my writing, I write reports and I write things to boards. My creative writing does not happen at the Royal Literary Fund in a way that my directing and writing did happen at RADA and has happened elsewhere. And I think that's been really interesting in terms of what it means to craft a strategy and a sense of purpose. I have been able to be more dispassionate about it, but I can also still feel, and it's going to happen probably in the next, as we create this next strategy for the next 3 to 5 years, there will come a point when what the Royal Literary Fund should be doing and what I think it should be doing will be different things. And at that point, as Katie says, I need to walk away. I don't know that yet. I know that we're working on that process at the moment. And it may well be that I craft a strategy for the trustees to sign off on and agree and take on board and then say, but I'm off now. Bye. This is the thing I think you should be doing, but I'm not going to be doing it. A similar thing slightly happened when I was at RADA. We were part of a thing called the Conservatoire for Dance and Drama, which is a very messy organisation which had come together in the year 2000 and needed updating because of the way HE had changed. And I took that in a process of kind of compliance change, really, and said going into it, I think RADA will be a part of this on the other side, but I don't know. I know that we just need to sort this out. And at the end, to my surprise, RADA said, this is great, but we're going to walk away from it now. And it's a kind of refreshing thing to do. It's a bit scary because those kind of changes are always scary. But actually, if you can do it, I think it's kind of healthy for both you and the organization. And kind of one of my little kind of post-it notes to my successor at RADA was just be really clear about those boundaries. Be really clear about where you sit and where it sits, and have the courage I often didn't have to say no.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And I so appreciate that transparency as well. I think in the past, we've required leaders to be the organization and it to be everything. And I don't think that's healthy or provides longevity, including from a sustainability point of view to the organization, let alone yourself. And I think that has often been required of artistic directors or directors with more of an artistic vision in a different way, perhaps, to executive directors. And I think there is a much healthier balance, hopefully, that is coming into organizations, partially through joint CEOships, hopefully, but also through greater transparency with governance. So by having these conversations with our boards, I think that we can, hopefully take them on the journey as well as seeing our boards change to be more reflective of perhaps ourselves as leaders, rather than perhaps an older system of boards that we have. I'm going to slightly pivot, if that's all right, the conversation. I am always the person who is the toughest advocate of consultancy when it comes to your staff teams, as well as your stakeholders and audiences. And I really, truly believe that my staff team and all levels of staff team from administrator up can create more creative solutions than I can come up with by myself. But that is really challenging often to take people on journeys. Katie made a really interesting point about the fact that I'd made a throwaway comment about taking your staff teams on financial journeys, for example. Most recently, I've been working with Shakespeare's Globe, and we've been doing a full organisational change, purpose-led business modelling approach with them, led by the wonderful Stella Carnu, who is an incredible CEO there. And Stella has very much given us the remit and the role to go into all levels of staff team. Some people who, it's a large organisation, but who have been in post at a junior position for many years, and to talk to them about the numbers in a way no one ever has before. I think that often as organisations, we forget that most people, when they were 11, were told that because they liked art, they therefore didn't like maths. and they've never really come back from that place. They've told themselves that story still. So I think even just empowering people to go on those journeys of change with us and understand not just the art that they're great at and they're passionate about, the audiences, which actually I'd say often our staff teams are engaging with far more than we are on a day-to-day basis, but then also to bring them on board with that resource piece. And I'm going to use resource because actually that's always the problem. Money is an issue, but resource is often the bigger issue for all of us. I think has such a powerful thing to take both our audiences, our stakeholders, and our staff teams on journeys of change. So I'd be really interested in that, about how you've navigated times of change with those around you, be it staff, be it boards, be it audiences. Ed, can I come to you first this time?
Yeah, I mean, on the staff piece, I've been relatively advantaged by the fact that there was no staff. So actually, I've had the rare privilege of kind of building the team. And actually, the debate has really been, how big do we need to be? If we survive this long with this small number of people, how many do we need? And actually, because the team has been very small, they have been very used to being across all kinds of things. So I think my education director should spend less time on the minutiae or some of the finance stuff and more time on the big picture education stuff. But it's great that he does, because it means that there's a saving there. I think in terms of the kind of art number split, where I've had more interesting times is with my trustees, who historically were really all appointed for their ability to assess literary merit of applicants. So I have lots of people who are, amazing writers and agents and publishers and whatever. And they've tended to say, well, those three people over there are treasurers. They worry about the numbers. And trying to say, no, as trustees, you all worry about the numbers. And actually, we need to present the numbers in a way that you understand what's going on. It goes to the kind of impact thing. Actually, if we don't know, if you're not thinking, would it be all of you, would it be better to spend more on this and less on that, then we're not having useful conversations about where the organization is going. So yes, I don't need you to be across the finer percentage points of the interest we're getting on our investments from wherever. But I do need to be able to look at a budget and have the broadest sense of what's going on and challenge me as to why that's working like that. So actually, a lot of it has been dragging out. So how do I present this information? And I'm not a numbers person. So in a sense, I kind of come from the place of the stuff I've had to learn how to do in order to be able to read it, I can now use to teach them. But actually understanding that they need, and again, this is the lesson from RADA, where similar things used to apply. And we would have, I won't name names, there was a fantastic actor on the board who was exactly the sort of person I thought should be on the board, who after 2 or 3 years of sitting on the board said, I'm going to go because all you ever seem to talk about is finance and I don't understand it. Well, but no, we need you to be in the room, and we need, when the finance to be being discussed, you to be able to say, yeah, but what about the students? What about the staff? What about the work? And if board meetings are just getting siloed into just how the numbers add up, they're not doing the job. And if audit, I sit on the audit committee at Central School of Ballet. And I thought initially, why do you want me? I know nothing about audit. But actually I realized because I say, so hang on, it seems to me that the executive director has all the risks in this risk register. That ain't going to work. Because when they're not here, it falls apart. So actually, we're not doing this job properly. Because I know the strain of that. And so trying to, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, how you get the organization to feel secure across all of what it's doing and all of the measures being used for that, and to understand the value of those measures. And again, for me, it is here coming back to the impact and evaluation piece and having the right tools to do that. We're kind of still experimenting with what is the right way to do that, because the money one that rules elsewhere isn't particularly relevant to us up to a point. And I know the numbers ones about simple percentages are really risky because they can skew things. So what are the tools you can use to say, how are we doing? And can we all buy into those? And can we agree this is the way we're going to evaluate it? And this is what it means.
Thanks, Ed. That's so helpful. Katie?
I was just thinking about the story. It always comes back to story and the story of a budget. our first chair for Paynes Plough, wonderful, brilliant, Kim Grant. I have to name her because she's wonderful and brilliant, and in terms of like the story of the numbers. And I think she just really opened that up for us as CEOs, which is how you're telling a story in the context of your budget. And I think that's just absolutely stuck for us, and how we sort of look at stuff. I'm definitely not a maths person. I grew up in the household which was, oh, Katie, she's great, she's the creative one, and I was like, oh, hi there, friends. Oh yeah, okay, I can do other stuff too. But I really struggled. I really found it difficult. And I think as soon as I understood that a budget or numbers tell a story, I went, oh, this is great. I love it. This is brilliant. Plus, if you then zoom out and go, okay, management accounts, your creditors and your debtors, well, they're your relationships. Well, that's cool. Okay, so I need to make sure our relationships are really robust. So it's like finding different ways in. And I think that's the way that we sort of approach it in the context of Paynes Plough, that with our team, we do talk about it as a story, and the story of the numbers and the budgets and the work. And I think that's how it really helps. I was just thinking, I actually just stepped down after my tenure for York Theatre Royal. I've been a board member in an amazing board, and a really big board of very sort of business-minded people that I've learnt loads from, but I was one of the only artistic leaders in the context of that board, and I could often feel myself going, yes, I get that. Yes, but what about the art? Flying my flag. And I realized how much that added value, but I realized I also had to communicate what that meant in the context of where other people were thinking. And I think that is a real skill that I hope to consistently develop, which is going, you can't be presumptuous that you're all saying the same thing or thinking the same thing ever in the context of any room. But certainly when you're thinking that of everyone's coming in, particularly from a board perspective, that there's such a brilliant range of skills. And so how are we all kind of collectively feeding the bigger vision, the whys, the purpose, and going and telling a story together? And even in like strategy documents, I now really genuinely work and go, okay, what's the next story beat? What's the next story beat? Because it helps me creatively feel inspired to write those documents, but it also makes me really, I think it gives me the rigor of going, actually, what are we saying, and what is this, and is it just words, or what's active? And so I think everything, I guess, coexists together. But I think in any way, it's just opening up and understanding how people absorb information. I think that work at the Globe sounds really thrilling. We're about to go and do a big away day with our team, and really leaning into the big blue sky thinking. Quite often we get into the granular, and it's the why and the how, and then you're like, oh, actually, we're just then following certain patterns. Hold on, if we force ourselves not to do that, wouldn't that be amazing? And even in the context of like free writing, when you work with writers and you just go, just don't think, see what comes out. If you do that in the space of your team and the opportunities, and as you say, like, I'm sure next week our team are going to come up with some amazing things that me and Charlotte, haven't even thought about, or maybe we haven't even explored, and that's so cool. But I think it's just making sure that, I guess, giving them the right foundations, the right knowledge, and not feeling like they're just speaking and then we're going, okay, yeah, thanks, that's great, and we're just like disregarding it. It's actually going, how are we all coming back to the DNA of everything?
And I think one of the things that many organizations get wrong is they consult because funders have told them to, and they don't actually have constant dialogue with those audiences. And by audiences, again, I mean our staff team. So we are told that at one point we need to ask people questions. So we do, and we never do anything with that. It never goes anywhere. We never feed back to them what we heard. And we therefore, I don't think, should be trusted to then go back and ask them again. And so there's definitely that challenge, isn't there, in saying, thank you. So like, this is why we're consulting you, and this is where it's going. That is so important, so that that lovely sentence you just said, so that you can take everyone on the journey of why. I think that's really helpful. I'm going to just again just share some final thoughts, if I may, just to pull together both of your thoughts. So some of the things that I think were really challenging for me in particular today. Katie, throughout you used the words re a lot, which I loved. So you used rethink, repurpose, rebalance. And that idea that nothing is off the table, I think is so empowering, rather than having a view of, well, this is how we've always done it. So we're just continuing with the cycle. But actually, we have that space in our creative practice. Why don't we in our business models? And allowing ourselves the space, definitely the issue in this, to think creatively. Because again, the kind of the space that maybe we have to think creatively when it comes to writing or adaptations, or the space that we create there, if we don't allow ourselves the same space in business planning as a process, we're not going to have the time for true consultation with our audiences and stakeholders. We're not going to have the time to take our staff on a journey. And we're not even going to ourselves have the time to put together more radical and interesting ideas that hopefully will be far more sustainable for the future. Thank you so much for your time today. I'm hugely grateful to Katie and Edward for joining us. And Katie's colleague will be online for the next 10 minutes to answer any questions for those watching. You can answer those questions in the comments section below. Achates, as many of you will know, is here to support the sector. We do this in a variety of ways, ranging from strategic business planning and consultancies with your staff, board and trustees, as we've been talking about, through to feasibility studies, recruitment support for development positions to CEOs and trustees, and organisational change, as well as with fundraising and income generation support from strategy development to bid writing. Make sure you've signed up for our brand new platform, Achates Community. It launches in October and provides a leadership and personal development programme for all cultural sector professionals responsible for income generation. Our next Achates Inspires will take place in November, where we'll be looking at if it's possible to have a positive environmental impact as organisations, rather than simply mitigate our negative impact, including we'll be discussing how ideas around the circular economy may play into the positive impact we can have.